We'll call to order the Petersburg Borough regular meeting of the Borough Assembly here on Monday, December 20th, 2021. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Bob?
Here.
David?
Here.
Jay?
Here.
Thomas?
Thomas is excused.
Jeff?
Here.
Mark?
Mayor Jensen is excused.
Chelsea?
Here.
We have the present 5 members are all here in chambers with Mayor Jensen, Member Fine Walsh excused. With that, we will stand for the voluntary Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, that brings us to item number 3, approval of minutes. We have the December 6th, 2021 regular meeting minutes and the following minutes from October 20th to April 2021. I will forego reading the list, but they're all in between then, including regular and special meetings. I would entertain a motion to approve these minutes.
So move. Second.
Motion been made by Member Mucci and seconded by Member Tremblay. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we approve those unanimously. At this point, item number 4, I would entertain a motion to either amend or approve tonight's meeting agenda. Or I should rephrase it. I would entertain a motion to approve the meeting agenda unless anyone has any amendments.
So move. Second.
Again, the motion's been made by Member Mucci and seconded by Member Tremblay. Any amendments out there? Give an opportunity. All right. All those in favor of approving tonight's agenda as is, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We have approved tonight's meeting agenda unanimously as is. There are no public hearings scheduled tonight, and there are no bid awards. Which brings us to item 7. Clerk Thompson, is there anyone in the queue for persons to be heard related to tonight's agenda?
Vice Mayor Stanton Gregor, we do have Ryan Weldy from the fire department on the line. I don't know if you would like him to speak now or if you would rather he wait until the agenda item on the fire truck.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think if it's okay with him, I'd like him to wait for that so we can have some question and answer with him if need be, as opposed to just giving testimony.
That makes sense. And so therefore we do not have anyone in the queue.
Excellent. Thank you, Clerk Thompson. And I'm going to assume that also means for persons to be heard unrelated to the agenda as well?
That is correct.
And for those listening at home, there is no one in the audience waiting to testify, so we will move on. To board, commission, and committee reports, we do not have any. But in the consent agenda, we have 2 items which I'll entertain as a group. The Trees LLC liquor license renewal. I'll briefly read this. The Trees LLC has applied with the Alaska Alcohol and Marijuana Control Office for a package store liquor license renewal. The Assembly may support or protest this application. A protest may not be arbitrary, capricious, or unreasonable. And item number 2 in the consent agenda is Petersburg Little League use of Fort Fryer, ball fields agreement renewal. Since March 2016, the Petersburg Little League has agreed to undertake the executive right, privilege, and obligation to use, manage, and operate and maintain Fort Fryer ball fields. Current agreement expires December 31st, 2021. The borough wishes to continue this agreement to December 31st, 2024. I would entertain a motion to approve both of these items. I'll move.
Second.
The motion's been made by Member Mucci and seconded by Member Tremblay. The clerk, please call the roll.
Mark? Oh, sorry, he's gone. Jeff?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Thank you.
Consent agenda passes unanimously for both of those items. Which brings us to the report of other officers. A SEPA update. Assembly and SEPA Board Member Bob Lynn and Utility Director Hagerman will provide us an update on SEPA activities. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Mr. Hagerman has the floor here.
Mayor and Assembly, happy to provide an update for you tonight. In regards to a recent quarterly SEPA meeting that was held on December 10th. Quite a few big things happened at that meeting. It was brutal. It was 8 in the morning till about 7 o'clock at night. Constant action all the way through that. So a lot of stuff was discussed, and happy to offer this update. Next slide, please. So probably the biggest news out of the meeting is that the board unanimously voted to increase the wholesale power rate to the member communities. First rate increase in over 23 years from the agency. The rate increase was 1/4 cent per kilowatt hour, and puts the rate, which was at 6.8 cents per kilowatt hour, to 7.05 cents per kilowatt hour. The reasons for the rate increase are many, and the CEO did a great job of priming us as a board over the last couple of years, actually, on the need for this. Most recently, the submarine cable project that came about and the debt service needed for that project really pushed this along probably faster than it would have come otherwise. But general inflation is always an issue. The 4R plan, which we'll talk a little bit more about it later in this report, requires annual payments into essentially a capital project fund in order to handle the needs of the agency. The board approved a vegetation management program, which is basically a clearing and brushing program for over 100 miles of line involved in SEPA's operation. And so that is a substantial cost. All those things added together have effectively eliminated any chance for a rebate, as we've seen in the past from the agency, and in fact pushed the revenue requirements up to the need for a rate increase. Tonight, the Assembly is considering passage of Ordinance 2021-18, which is electric ordinance, and that rate increase that is in front of the Assembly on that has been taken into account. Has taken into account the wholesale increase. If you remember, Trey Atkinson, the CEO, was in Petersburg this year and mentioned that there would be a wholesale rate increase coming, 1/4 cent now and 1/4 cent sometime in the future. And so we knew that was coming at Power and Light, and included that in the rate study. It's quite possible and very likely that additional rate increases are coming from SEPA. The budget that was presented to the board at the December 10th meeting is a balanced budget, and the revenue from the 1/4 cent increase was needed to balance that budget in the future. We'll just see. I think the CEO does a great job of withholding any increases or discussion of any increases until he knows for certain that they will occur or that they're needed. And so we, as a board, will be discussing that in the next couple meetings, and trying to determine when that next rate increase may come and how much it will be. Next slide, please. The engineering director, Robert Siedemann, did a great report. Talked about the amount of projects that were pushed out from SEPA staff in 2021. It was a really heavy lift on their part, particularly because of they have such a very small staff. They're operating very lean, and the complexity and the work that went in just into the submarine cable job was amazing. They did incredible work on that. The benefit of that project is almost completely to Petersburg. We are the ones on the end of that line that benefit from the redundancy that's now in place for those submarine cables. The cost of the project was $12.5 million. And all ratepayers of SEPA will be repaying that debt, and not just Petersburg. One of the big benefits of being a part of the agency. The engineering director did point out in his presentation that because of in-house efforts and diligence on their part, they did save the agency $2.8 million due to coming in under budget or some other issues. And that, of course, benefits all the communities served by SEPA. Next slide, please. So a listing, I won't try to, it's really small up there, but listing of the projects that were completed in 2021. I should have put the date on the top of the page. These are the projects that were worked on in this last year. And it's all of these projects have a certain complexity that is hard to understand or just looking at the list. We feel that SEPA staff did an amazing job pushing this out of their office this year. Next slide, please. At the end of every year, the SEPA staff develops an operations plan for the next year. This year is no different. And they go over the projections for how both projects, Tyee and Swan Lake, will be operated. This year in 2021 was a very interesting year. We hit spill level. The lakes were full in June, and they didn't really come off of spill until just recently when the lake started to freeze up and we started to draft. I wanted to point out that that Tyee Lake actually spilled the equivalent of 64 megawatt hours of power that could have been sent to people's homes if we had a taller, a deeper lake. And likewise, Swan spilled 13 megawatt hours of power. But even with the loss of that power, the project supplied all three communities, Ketchikan, Petersburg, and Wrangell, with firm power requirements, and even dispatched available firm power from Tyee to Ketchikan to supplement their needs in Ketchikan. So it was a very good water year and a good year for SEPA. Predictions for this winter, we're seeing it this week. We're looking at colder temperatures and average precipitation, which should mean a really good snowpack for next year. And heading into next year's operations plan, looks like the lakes should be full in the spring. The one thing that came about after the drought a couple of years ago was development of a guide sales curve by SEPA staff for the Tyee Lake operations, and that remains in place.
Oh,
Oops.
where'd it go? What the heck? I'm sorry, I'll get it back. Apologize.
There we go.
So, and the reason for that is basically the way the power sales agreement is set up, that all the needs of Petersburg and Wrangell need to be met out of Tyee Lake at all times. So the method that they use, could you advance the slide, please? I'll talk about it a little bit. The method they use is, in this graph, shows these two lines here. That Petersburg and Wrangell's power needs are met at all times. Remember, Lynn?
Back to that graph, you would just, where you have the difference there between the lower level, so forth, that's the amount of water that would remain in the reservoir for use just by Wrangell and Petersburg. And depending on what we're drafting at, that's at least 40 days. It could be 2 to 3 months, depending on how much the inflow and the outflow. But I think we all felt it was significantly enough to take care of any needs we'd have for that period of time while we don't have the refill of the reservoirs.
We did approve the budget. The board approved the budget unanimously, and some notes on that. There are 14 new projects for various equipment replacements or upgrades and systems. 9 projects from this year that actually got carried over will be completed this next year. The bonding for the submarine cable project and the debt service for that are also part of the budget. Notable projects, the Wrangell SEPA office and warehouse was damaged by fire this year. On top of everything else they were dealing with, they had a fire. And so they're working through the insurance company to get a settlement, and that will be a project to renovate that damaged structure. And there is a Tyee switchgear project that they're working on engineering this year, and construction will occur the next couple of years. It's a pretty substantial project, and timing is key. So it's a little over $2 million, and that will be spread out not only in this next year, but the 2 following budget years. The vegetation management program, like I said, the brushing and clearing of line, and how they did that is they took the entire system, the intertie and their lines from the projects to the communities, and divided it up into chunks that they can reasonably expect to clear every year. And that's a substantial amount of work, you know, when you're talking over 100 miles of clearing and brushing. Of course, you can't do it all at one time. I think it was a 15-year rotation, you know, to get all those chunks done once and then start all over again. So that work requires contracts, and they'll be moving forward with getting that set up this next year. And then, of course, there are payments being made into the renewal and replacement fund to take care of capital projects in the future. Next slide, please. So this is the capital budget for FY 2022, with the upper section of that being the projects that are being carried over from this 2021, and the lower section being the new projects that are being started in 2022. And again, this is basically, they have one engineering director and one generation specialist that push all of this work out of their office. So it's a lot of work for 2 guys. Next slide, please. The 4R plan was also presented to the board, and this plan is essentially a capital improvement plan. They update it every 5 years, and it looks at all the assets of the agency. And in this go around, they really took a close look and did a conditions assessment of these assets, large and small, and then estimated how much it would cost to repair or replace those when their life cycle came up. And then they laid that out in a 30-year plan and did a adjustment for when in that 30 years each project would be completed, so that they had a total cost of all this work over the next 30 years. And then they take that amount and turn that into what is needed every year in the budget, so that they can keep the capital improvement fund, the 4R fund, solvent and be ready to do that work when it comes up on the schedule. Next slide, please. This is an example of, it's a very general breakdown of the projects. Of course, we've got generation facilities, transmission, and rolling stock, and all these numbers are in thousands. So the work for Tyee Lake associated facilities is $131 million over the next 30 years. And that's in today's dollars. This is not the inflation adjusted numbers. So the total amount of work in today's dollars for the agency over the next 30 years is estimated to be $179 million. It's there's a lot of work to do. Bob.
One other thing to add to this is, when we looked over the 30 years, one of the things they came up with is the fact that most of the equipment, the system was put into place approximately 25, 30 years ago. And so what we're looking at right now is major replacements in the next 25 to 30 years. One of the discussions we had was, do we let the stock go to it absolutely fails, or do we start replacing it? We addressed that, and I don't think we came to a total conclusion, because there's so many complex parts to this. Thank you.
So I see for Tyee, the biggest number there is for transmission facilities. I assume those are undersea cables.
Yes.
Okay.
But because of the recent failure, there's, there's always been attention paid to that, but even more so now. Next. This is an example, or actually the approved plan for contributions to the R&R fund. And so you'll see that the next couple of years, the agency plans to put in $3 million, and then that ramps up because of some of the larger ticket items that Bob mentioned, all kind of happening at the same time. And then towards the end of that run, it's anticipated that there might be an opportunity to ramp down that as some of those larger projects get completed. That's a long way out. Like I said, this plan is updated every 5 years. These numbers will likely change. The projects will likely change, but to me, it's a very good practice for the agency to keep up on, and it lets the board know that they have the overall system in mind, and they are proceeding with planning for replacements and rehabilitation on a constant basis. Next slide, please. Lastly, just a quick note about the November 30th storm that Wrangell encountered. A very short, very intense windstorm. Still hard to know exactly how hard the wind blew, but it obviously came from a different direction, and it was a complete surprise to the community and to all of us. A large tree came down because of the wind in their city park area, took out 3 SEPA poles and put all the lines on the road. And so Wrangell Municipal Light and Power worked with others for their borough to get some of the local lines up. The SEPA had to fly in a contractor the next day. They essentially worked with Wrangell through that night. And then, the snow started that night as well, when it started the onslaught of what we see on the ground now. So under some really terrible conditions, those crews did an amazing job of restoring power, getting everything back up in the air. And some customers were out of power for 40 hours. Lots were much less than that. I think Petersburg's outage was only 2 hours or 3 hours or something like that. So pretty insignificant for us when you consider that some folks were out of power for that long, and the temperatures were not all that great. We offered to send linemen over. Catch Can offered linemen and materials. Sitka offered whatever Wrangell needed. As it turns out, SEPA and Wrangell Light and Power had everything they needed with the contractor that came in. But they were very thankful of all the offers for help, and we were happy to offer that too. So anyway, it's just another a really good feature of being part of this agency, is that you can rely on others when the chips are down, even if you don't need it. So I think that's it. Oh, there's a picture of the damage. This is after most things were back up in the wee hours in the morning. I'll open it up to Member Lynn if he has any further comments on any of that.
Just a couple points. I was asked today about whether or not we've looked at new power generation, and the answer is yes, we have, looking at other options out there. But there's way too many questions yet, even on what we've looked at, to have any kind of conclusions or any kind of priorities of where we might want to go or what we might want to do. So that's kind of where we're at on it. And the last thing, back to that 4R plan, that when we talked about the risk reserve, as I said today, we have to have that money on hand if one of those cables break, because we can't go out and get a short-term loan, that type of thing. So the money to replace a cable has to be on hand. And that's why we have to significantly increase those risk reserves to be able to take care of it if in fact it's just a matter of when we have another failure. So that's one of the reasons you see with the table that Carl showed earlier, why we need to increase those reserves.
And one last thing, we were fortunate, the agency was fortunate enough to have an insurance policy for that submarine cable. And it paid off. There was a $250,000 deductible of sorts for a $5 million policy. And it turns out the insurance company did not charge that deductible. They gave the agency the full $5 million because of the cost of the project was so much more than the policy was held. So that was a very good thing. But we did find out at the meeting that that insurance is no longer available. So it came through one time, and yeah, it helped a lot. But yeah, we need to plan for full replacements in the future.
I guess in conclusion, the last thing I'd add is that we've had several jobs, SEPA jobs open. They're very, very highly skilled, highly technical. We've been looking for people to fill them. One of those jobs we've had open now for 2 years. And it's the kind of jobs we cannot find. We've offered incentives, we've doubled the salary. We cannot find skilled people to fill them. One of the things that Trey brought to our attention is the fact with the infrastructure money that's coming in, that everybody over the United States is going to be looking for skills, engineering skills, everything else, and which are going to be very short supply. And so that whatever comes about, we're all going to be, fighting for the same kind of skills, and we're looking at probably increased costs from that. That's
Member Mucci, I was going to say further questions for Director Hagerman or Member Lynn. Go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just to kind of go over some of the slides that you put forward there. So we have a SEPA rate increase that's happening shortly.
Takes effect January 1.
Okay, and then your next one, when will that be in place, and how will you determine when to put it in place?
That's a question the board has for the CEO, what he's planning there. It's not factored into the 2022 budget at all. Just the one increase. There is not a second increase in 2022 that we know of right now. The board has been hearing, for years that it will be more than a quarter cent. So the board is very interested to know what the CEO is planning on that regard.
One of the other questions I had, Mr. Mayor, is, we're talking about extending the line from Ketchikan to possibly Metlakatla, and looking at some of the notes that I've read, that there's been a conversation about additional power needs for cake and stuff. Is that part of the SEPA's board's deliberation, or is that happening yet? Or
all I can say about that is that the board is being kept apprised of what the SEPA leadership knows of those projects, and it's not much. It's that's really all I can say. There's really nothing happening as far as SEPA is concerned.
So there's not a push, or nobody has floated the idea about power from Ketchikan to Metlakatla. Okay, but from
no, let me answer that a little bit. Not from SEPA's standpoint, but there is a group in Ketchikan and some other folks who are looking at maybe trying to find funding to do something like that and to make an intertie, but we don't know. That's about what I'm telling you right now is about pretty much all we know. We have not been contacted formally, for any kind of, formal discussions or anything else that I'm aware of.
So are you hearing about discussions about possible power to cake in the same general terms that you're hearing about it from groups for power to Metlakatla?
No, not at all.
Mentioned vegetation management, and you're advertising for the community to come forward with trees that they'd like to see trimmed and stuff. Would it be possible to use folks like that to help you with your vegetation management issues that we have here that we're seeing with the snow load, or is this something that Power and Light personnel would just contract somebody locally here and they do that?
What we do now is, when smaller issues come up, the line crew can handle quite a bit, with our equipment. And right now, the snow load on the trees is really the problem. If we didn't have the snow, a lot of these trees wouldn't be an issue. We try to keep up with brushing as much as we can locally. Just these conditions that we're seeing right now is really exacerbated a lot of questionable areas. So, to answer your question, a contractor, coming in that may be doing some work from SEPA, they're going to be working remote, and it's probably not going to save us that much money to have them swoop into Petersburg as opposed to just trying to handle it the way we have with the local crews if we can. And then if there's a danger tree that's large, we hire a local tree faller that's insured and bonded to do that work for us. And that's worked out pretty well. It's unfortunate right now that, with the snow, that the way it is came so heavy and so fast that really caused a lot of problems.
Okay, thank you very much.
We really appreciate the community coming forward with lots of with reports. Yeah, it's helped a lot.
Further questions for Director Hagerman? Carl and Bob, thank you guys so much for the update tonight and your continued work on SEPA. Much appreciated. Okay, I'll bring us on to the mayor's report. Thank you to our many snow angels. During the recent heavy snowfall, the local ADOT road crew, our public works crew, our power and light, harbor, police, fire, parks and recreation, library, finance administration, Mountain View Manor, sanitation, water and wastewater staff, and many private businesses and persons with snow removal equipment worked tirelessly for days and hours on end to keep our roads clear, our harbors safe, and our public buildings and residences accessible. Working together in times like this is what makes Petersburg a great community. Thank you, everyone, for your efforts. Yeah, everyone's been working hard, and the work continues. That snow is hanging on. So thank you again to all who participated and helped on that one. We're seeking letters of interest. The Petersburg Borough is accepting letters of interest from citizens who wish to serve the community by filling one of the vacant seats on the following borough board/commissions until the October 22 municipal election. We have 2 vacant seats on the Planning Commission, and we also have 2 vacant seats on the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. I would highly encourage anyone to reach out for that. Planning Commission is extremely important, and Parks and Rec Advisory Board helps us guide policy for Parks and Rec. So please put in your names to do so. And letters of interest should be submitted to Clerk Thompson at the borough offices located at 12 South Nordic Drive by sending to P.O. Box 329, Petersburg, AK 99833, or by emailing it to dthompson@petersburgak.gov. On behalf of the Borough Assembly, we wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Here's to a safe and healthy 22. And for everyone listening at home, however you celebrate during this holiday season, I hope it's filled with gratitude and peace and being surrounded by people you care about. So happy holidays to all. And with that, Borough Manager, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, sir. The library is planning our annual Winter Reading Challenge. This year, the theme will be Build a Better World. The program runs through the month of January. Community members are challenged to read and do good deeds for the chance to win $500 for their favorite local nonprofit. The program is sponsored by the Friends of Petersburg Libraries. If you didn't already know, the library is now a community distribution site for home COVID tests, along with the fire department and the police department. I'll skip what the mayor already has covered. Is thanks to all the people doing snow removal. It has become a bit of a challenge for us, and the folks working on it, it's been amazing. We're trying, with a little bit of break in the weather until this evening, we've been working on trying to get the fire hydrants uncovered, cleaning out the snow dumps, and widen the streets before this hits again. We do request people to avoid plowing snow into the fire hydrants. This slows down emergency response if needed. Motor pool shop repairs are substantially complete. We are working on contract punch list and closeout items. Crew is beginning to shift equipment over from the temporary shop quarters into the Public Works building where it is heated, and hopefully they will be a little more comfortable than where they have been. In addition to the regular operations and assisting Public Works with snow removal, the sanitation crew has been busy with snow removal up at the baler and landfill. Garbage and recycling pickups have been complicated by all the excess snow, but the crew is doing a great job keeping up with the regular collection schedules. I'm going to remind everybody with the current and upcoming freezing temperatures, the water department wishes to remind customers to make sure water lines and meters are protected from freezing. Alaska Municipal League has drafted a letter for submission to the ADEC Commissioner. It is being reviewed by the 301H group prior to going to the elected bodies for signature. This is the letter talking about requirements on the wastewater treatment that would cost us an awful lot of money if it goes in place. Adam Day has been hired as our next power plant mechanic and operator. He will maintain his lineman's certificate of fitness in case he is needed in that capacity. And he'll be receiving substantial training from Bob Zemke before Bob's retirement next August. The department will begin looking for a journeyman lineman to fill out the crew soon. Line crew has been, as Carl mentioned, very busy dealing with dozens of reports of trees and branches encroaching on the power lines due to heavy snow. Thanks to the community for reporting these problems and for understanding when branches need to be trimmed or trees need to be removed due to snow damage or encroachment. Call 772-4203 to report branches in the power line. Customers are requested to maintain their accessibility to their electric meters and water meters. Not only does this help the meter reader do her job, but access to the meter and main disconnect is important in the event of a fire. Big thanks for harbor staff working through weekends and well over their shifts to keep equipment running and maintain traffic and access throughout the entire port and harbor system. We did lose one boat, but the potential for losing quite a few more was there. We also appreciate the 4 guys who came down and gave extra help, hand plowing and shoveling in those early hours. Jim Engel, Chris Clark, Jordan Reed, and Aaron Phillips jumped in and made all the difference. We appreciate the public works crew who took care of approaches and parking lots to allow the boat owners access to their vessels. Lastly, thank you to Charles Davis and Thomas Mercer for assistance in raising the vessel, and Derek Gibb for clearing areas when our equipment went down. Please keep your boats and the fingers shoveled, and if there is a power outage, check your vessel ASAP to make sure we don't have additional problems in the harbor. Harbor staff has been working with the Corps of Engineers to finalize the pre-bid stage of dredge construction on the South Harbor project. Fire EMS is working on a schedule to offer emergency trauma technician courses, and Parks and Rec added an outside light to our pool deck door, also some lights around the activity room. We are trying to work with some local contractors to discuss the racquetball lighting. I know it's been kind of a pain for everyone. Unfortunately, the lights that are in there are no longer made. And so we're having to do some retrofitting. New frames have been having to be built for the fixtures that we can get, and electrical work is required as well. So we're working through that. We have completed a new pass holder agreement for Parks and Rec. It will be used going forward on all new customers. And the manor is open for visitors. Masks required. Call 772-2445 with any questions. Elderly housing and assisted living both are full with wait lists. And we again thank the PMC doctors who continue to see residents for routine appointments at assisted living. We are getting ready for our elderly housing HUD REAC inspection, which is scheduled for December 29th. The inspector will fly in on the 28th. Let's see. I attended a meeting with AML, sponsored by AML, to discuss issues important to the Alaska coastal communities. Mayors and managers from throughout Alaska were invited. We had about 40 participants, and notes from the meetings and future dates will be distributed when completed by AML. We're calling it the Coastal Belt Group, and kind of just not to replace or not to fight with, but to get what our needs are out to the rail belt communities and our legislature that keeps an eye on how money should be spent. I have reached out to both Sea Alaska and Tlingit Haida Housing to discuss possible collaboration opportunities in Petersburg. Housing and harbor infrastructure are tops on the list at the moment. Sea Alaska, we're going to get back together after the first of the year and people come back from vacations. And Tlingit Haida is also very interested in as well in talking about housing and potentially another project like we did at the airport subdivision. And a kind of update on the landless thing that's last minute. The landless bill that has been put forward by Senator Murkowski and Senator Sullivan, and then Representative Young in the House, has been put on hold to the spring. The senators would like to do some form of hearing in the spring, In a Senate floor statement celebrating the 50th anniversary of the passage of ANSCA, Senator Murkowski referenced the landless village legislation as a top priority for her to continue to address unfulfilled promises within ANSCA. But again, at this point, it's on hold until March. And that's it, unless there's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Questions for the manager this evening? Right on, Steve, your last report for the year.
Nope.
Oh, there you go. Member Tremblay. I
Sorry.
jumped over you, my bad.
No, it's okay. I realized I forgot I had my question because I asked you this privately earlier in the day, but I think it's important for the community. We're hearing a lot of reports about the new variant for the Omicron. I'm losing track now. And one measure that's being talked about as being really important for helping prevent it from going further is doing the rapid testing quickly. So I just wanted to mention that I asked you how many rapid tests we have available for the community, and there are about 500 right now, and you're working to get more. And so we just picked ours up for Christmas from the library today, and it's going to help me have a happy, healthy Christmas with my loved ones, hopefully. And so I just wanted to thank you for answering my question earlier and use it as a moment to talk about it earlier in the meeting than later, because that's a really nice, having it more places is more easily accessible throughout the community is really, really great. So thank you for.
You are welcome,
yeah.
and thanks to the hospital. We're working closely with them to get another order in. And I think at least so far, there's not been any shortage of being able to get those. And we'll continue to do that. The school uses a different test, and they also have had some luck continuing to get those antigen testing in place. So far, so good.
Yeah, just on that note, so far so good. We did only take the ones we're planning on using for the immediate future. I would encourage the community to think prudently and leave enough for the people to come after you, because given the changing dynamics of the situation, the fact that we can get them now is great, and we'll see what happens in the future. So yeah, just a lot of gratitude for you and for all the departments for hosting. So that's it for my question. Thank you.
I'm glad you brought that up, Member Tremblay, as the last chunk of time since COVID hit has shown us testing is one of our best, early testing is one of our best lines of defense for community spread. So thank you for bringing that to our attention this evening. And a reminder for me that I need to go to the library and get some for us as well. All right, bringing us to unfinished business. Ordinance 2021-18, an ordinance updating various provisions of Chapter 14.16 of the Municipal Code entitled Electric Utility and including electric rate and connection cost increases. Third and final reading. If adopted, Ordinance 2021-18 will update the Electric Utility Code and increase electrical rates. Ordinance 2021-18 was unanimously approved in its first and second readings. Let's start by, I'd entertain a motion to approve this.
So moved.
Second.
Motion been made by Member Mucci and seconded by Member Tremblay. Before we go further, I have a question for you, Clerk Thompson, that I should have clarified earlier. Director Hagerman's new drafted section, does that need to be added by amendment? I believe it does.
Yes, it does.
There we go. Then
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I have two motions to make if I could on that.
proceed.
The first one is just a cleanup item, and that would be in section 14.16.715C to change 51 to 70 watt LED to 51 to 100 watt LED and 100 to 150 watt LED to 101 to 150 watt LED.
Second that amendment.
That amendment has been made by Member Lynn and seconded by Member Mucci. Clerk Thompson, did you get that?
Yes, I did.
Right on.
Thank you.
Discussion on the amendment. Clerk, call the roll on the amendment.
Chelsea,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Bob, David,
Yes.
Jay.
Yes,
Thank you.
and that amendment passes unanimously. Member Lynn, it looks like you have something more to add.
Yes, I do.
right.
I propose to add another section 14.16.725 rates for diesel generation adjustment charge. And there's two sections to this. A would be the applicability and I'll read it, at the Assembly's discretion, an adjustment may be applied to each kilowatt hour billed under all schedules for fuel, engine oil, and staff overtime expenses incurred when unplanned and unbudgeted diesel generation is required in support of insufficient supply of purchased power or to supplant purchase power due to an emergency situation. This shall not apply to diesel generation required during scheduled maintenance periods of the wholesale power supplier, which are covered under section 14.16.720. And then there's an item B, and I have a hard time, it's a method of calculation of how that would be calculated.
Yep.
And I can go through it, but
I think you need to. We've all had access
okay,
to it. Yeah, we had access to it. Go ahead. You don't have to.
okay, it's the adjustment in cents per kilowatt hour applied to prior month's usage shall be calculated as follows. Diesel generation adjustment equals the B plus O plus OT slash D times D over Q times that, and I'll define the terms. B is the total prior month's cost of fuel burned during the diesel generation event in dollars. O, total prior month's cost of oil consumed during diesel generation event in dollars. OT is the total month's cost of staff operations overtime during the diesel generation event. D is the kilowatt hours generated during prior months by diesel plant. And G, total generation during prior month, including purchase power in kilowatt hours. And essentially what this does is that if we get, hopefully we never had this happen, but what this does is cover the situation in case we're down and we're on diesel generating power for a long period of time. And our costs are, and Carl might correct me, our costs are about three times more on diesel than they are on with just SEPA power. And that's what this is to cover.
Yep, let's get the motion on the floor first.
I'll second the
All
amendment.
right, thank you. You're all good. That amendment was made by Member Lynn, seconded by Member Mucci. And yeah, just to clarify, thank you for the details, Member Lynn. That is all. The details of that are attached under this ordinance item for those listening at home that want to do some really, really complex math, but also just for the assembly. And just to summarize that, and Member Lynn or Director Hageman cut me off, it's a diesel generation adjustment charge for those times when unplanned and unbudgeted diesel generation is required. That's the bones of it, yeah? Okay. And the details are in the attached in the ordinance. Further discussion on said amendment. Member Tremblay, proceed.
Thank you. I had sent this question to Dr. Hagerman earlier, asking to try to interpret how that could turn into cost for an average residential person. Since we kind of broke down the cost of the rate increase for the vote, I thought it might be useful to talk about how this might translate into the real world. So if that's possible, I know.
Currently through the mayor,
Yep.
I did provide an example of how this diesel generation adjustment would work, separate page in the packet, and went through kind of a pretty close real world example of a 7-day diesel run. For instance, if a transmission tower were to fail on SEPA system and we didn't, we're not able to receive SEPA power. So that using that example and doing the adjustment calculations, lots of details and hypotheticals go into that. But the general, after doing the math that's in the ordinance, the result was an adjustment of 2.6293 cents per kilowatt hour for every kilowatt hour used by a customer in that month. And then applying that example to a theoretical billing period and using the average monthly usage for each customer class, we came up with some adjustments to put some numbers to Member Tremblay's question. So for a residential customer class, a household using 1,600 kilowatt hours in a month, the normal billing based on the proposed rates in the electric ordinance that you're considering would be $175.75. If in that month we did have that 7-day diesel run, using the example that I provided, the adjusted bill would be $217.82. So that's an adjustment of $42 to a residential bill if they're using the average of 1,600. And in every customer class, of course, it varies because of the average usage, and the actual billing or adjustment would be based on a customer's actual usage. So the average is, just something to give people an idea of what it could be. General service customers using 1900 kilowatt hours would see an adjustment for a 7-day diesel run of just under $50. The large commercial customers using 45,000 kilowatt hours in a month would see an adjustment of just under $1,200 for a 7-day diesel run. Harbor customers using 500 kilowatt hours would see an adjustment of $13. And municipal customers who on average use 68,000 kilowatt hours in a month would see an adjustment of just about $1,800. So that's just for a 7-day diesel run. Kind of emphasizes the increased cost that the utility sees when we do have to supply diesel all on our own.
And go ahead, Member Tremblay.
No, just thank you. That's very clarifying. And again, for those listening at home, this is for the unplanned surprise diesel runs, not the standard maintenance and all that. So thank you for that breakdown. Appreciate it.
Good question, Member Tremblay. Further question or any further discussion on that amendment? For the clerk, call the roll on that amendment.
Amendment number 2,
Roger?
David,
Yes.
Chelsea,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Okay, we're back to the main motion of a twice amended ordinance in its third reading. Any further discussion on the ordinance in its third reading as amended? The clerk, please call the roll.
Bob,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Chelsea, David.
Yes.
Thank you.
And the ordinance passes unanimously in its third and final reading. Brings us over to new business, ordinance 2021-22, and ordinance adjusting the fiscal year 2022 budget for known changes. If adopted, it will increase the South Harbor Dredging Harbor Department Fund from $728,000 $400 to $1 million. They'll also accept an additional $553,081 in fisheries business tax revenue and transfer $353,081 of those funds to the Harbor Fish Tax Revenue Fund. And accept $1,222,750 from the state of Alaska for the COVID testing contract extension. Also accepting 2 ARPA grants awarded to the library for $6,000 and $39,661, and it would transfer $73,233 into the Parks and Recreation Utility Fund to cover unbudgeted electrical utility costs due to the delayed repairs of the utility. I entertain a motion to approve this.
So moved.
Second.
And motion been made by Member Mucci and seconded by Member Tremblay. Discussion. Actually, before we go, we might be able to get ahead of a few questions here. Could you help us out a little bit, Director Tao, in terms of why some of these are important at this point? Or in particular, the harbor one in particular?
Sure, yep. By January 21st, we do need to pay the Corps $1 million. So we've only currently budgeted $728,000. It came a little quicker than we thought it was going to. We were planning on budgeting for it for next fiscal year, but they want our match earlier. So that's the reason for that one.
Yep.
Great news. I mean, we got $853,000 in fish tax, and we only budgeted $300,000. That's great. And of course, the airport COVID testing and screening, that was approved by the assembly already by resolution. But the fact that it's in the supplemental because it needs to go into the budget, which takes 3 readings, which is why it's in here. And then, yeah, Tara got some ARPA grants for the library, which is great for a podcast program, and additional janitorial, and then the utility increase at Parks and Rec. Is there any questions?
Yeah, questions for Director Tao on that? Felt pretty self-explanatory, but I wanted to give you the floor just in case. Thank you. Discussion. Member Mucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Of course.
It's not really a question, but I was reading the packet and, some of these ARPA grants that we received are pretty cool, but I just wanted to read the summary of the one that we got from the library that Director Alcott put in. It's for the Petersburg Indigenous Voices Project, and it's going to produce 36 30-minute radio podcasts with original content generated by a committee of local tribal members and Indigenous leaders. It will provide a trusted space for community engagement and dialogue to foster recovery and rebuilding in our community. Local tribal members have stressed how important it is to see and hear themselves represented in the community as an Indigenous person, how both our local media and Petersburg in general falls short in that respect. And that's just something real positive, I think, that the library is doing, and I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that when we were talking about this, so thank you.
Thank you for bringing it up, Member Mucci. It is a really great project. I'm excited for the community on that one. Further discussion? Okay, will the clerk call the roll in this first reading?
Bob,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Jay, Chelsea,
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Thank you.
And that ordinance passes unanimously in its first reading. The public hearing for this ordinance will be at our next meeting. Bring us to item B, Resolution 2021-17. A resolution requesting the U.S. Postal Service provide home mail delivery in Petersburg, Alaska. Assemblymember Kensinger asks the Assembly to approve the resolution requesting home mail delivery in Petersburg. I entertain a motion to approve.
So move.
Second.
Motion's been made by Member Mucci and seconded by Member Kensinger. And Member Kensinger, since you brought this before this, I will give the floor to you, sir.
Yes, I know everybody's frustrated right now with the post office, but this is something that wouldn't happen right away. More than likely, this would be something that would happen in a couple of years and would require a substantial amount of work on the Postal Service to make modifications to the existing facility and to hire either one or two postal delivery people. I think it's been pretty evident to anybody that's been up to the post office that we're paying a pretty heavy price in the community in terms of time and labor. If you run a business, you have to send somebody up there on the clock. If you're a private person, if you're like myself, you try and get your wife to do it or she won't do it and you absolutely need the part, then you have to go up there yourself. And it's been very inconvenient. And while this resolution doesn't necessarily solve the immediate problems, it looks out to the future. Current postal regulations, and this is how it's done everywhere else in the lower 48, if you have a community of over 2,500 people, you are eligible for home delivery. The last time we talked about this was in 1983. I'd also like to point out the internet hadn't even been invented then, or maybe it was, but it wasn't widely used. So lots happened. And I know there's a lot of pros and cons on this, but I'd say perhaps the biggest reason why we're doing this is just the utter frustration that we've had in breaking through to the managers of the post office, not our local post mistress, but actually the people that do the hiring, that set the hours, that say how many people can work here are up in Anchorage. And every time we reached out to them, either privately or as in Steve and I had a conversation for over an hour earlier in the month, have been very frustrating. They tell us everything's going to be fine. And then literally the very same day we go up there and everything's not fine. So it's pretty obvious that they don't value our time or our ability as, they don't recognize us as customers anymore. And we're paying a pretty heavy price. And at the very least, I hope this would kick our issue up to another level outside of the state, nationally, so that somebody else puts some eyes on it. And at the very least, we can get our local folks some assistance by having them put some more people to work here. So that's the reason for this.
Thank you, Member Kensinger. Other Assembly members, Member Lynn.
Mr. Mayor, yes, I would like to propose to add a new whereas to the resolution. And my whereas is, whereas in addition to home delivery, The Petersburg Borough asked the U.S. Postal Service to improve service to our residents by providing self-help stations in the post office lobby that customers may use to purchase stamps and products, as well as weigh, post, and drop off packages. And then if the motion is go, then we would need to amend the where therefore. And then after the section on Petersburg Borough residents, we would add and self-help stations in the post office lobby.
I'll second the amendment.
Discussion on the amendment. Well, actually, the amendment was made by member Lynn, seconded by member Mucci. Just keep it on track. And discussion on the amendment. Spencer is yours. Would you care to speak to it, member Lynn?
Right. I talked about a little bit about this today on the radio, is that in addition, there are some things I think can be done locally and that would really help us to, facilitate doing work. I'm not saying it's the panacea, but at least it might help. But I don't hear anybody, the Postal Service in Anchorage or anybody else looking at the types of things that I see taking place down south. And I think it's time we look at some of those too. And that's the reason for adding the whereas.
Further discussion on the amendment itself. Fair enough. Will the clerk call the roll on the amendment?
Jay,
Yes.
Chelsea,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Bob, David,
Yes.
Amendment passes unanimously. Now we're back to the resolution as a whole. Further discussion from the Assembly member Tremblay.
Thank you. I've been thinking a lot about this and people have been coming to me with their opinions, and I have to say, I don't think I will be supporting this resolution. I think I'd sign on to so many whereases within it that you would think that I would be, but I don't actually, to me, it seems like a negotiation tactic more than a thing that I would actually want to see implemented. But then what if it was implemented and I don't actually like the idea of it being implemented? And so I agree about the idea of the self-serve stations and that not being heard by offices outside of the island are really frustrating when they keep telling us things are fine and we know that they're not. But, I actually had a family member that was working for a rural delivery route down south, and they had her using her own car, and she was basically breaking herself, reaching across the passenger seat to try to reach into the boxes. And the alternative was she'd be driving on the wrong side of the road in rural areas, and just the logistics of it were kind of a mess. And so between hearing from people who are concerned about the disruption to their own addresses and businesses, like having to change your official address and the kind of silly but big logistics involved with that, I don't think that this would be a solution that I would actually enjoy seeing get implemented. So therefore, I can't vote in support of it. But I do appreciate bringing it forward because I think any kind of discussion of this big town-wide affecting issue is worth having. I've had a lot of text threads with friends about who's going when and trying to coordinate that way. And you're right, the day-to-day disruption is really substantial. And I'm just in awe of the amount of people willing to do that for other people, but also just the work of the employees who are up there right now working so hard to be Santa's elves. It's really quite something. And so I'm appreciative of them and of you, Member Kensinger, for bringing this forward. But that's where I think I landed on it, but I'm interested in hearing what other people have to say.
Since we're going in order and he's already spoken once, would you like the floor, Member Mucci? Just to keep it proper, I should defer to you before I go back to Member Lynn.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Of course.
I just spent an hour and 45 minutes up there from about 2 o'clock to whenever, and I always come home brain dead. It was nice catching up with a couple folks, and yeah, something needs to get done. Something has to get done. If it's only something as simple as Mayor Lynn's amendment to this, that would be helpful. I'm very thankful for the postmaster we have up there and the folks that are working up there. They're always kind, they have a smile on their face, and they're doing the best that we can. But it's a mess up there. And it's not just because it's Christmas. This has been going on for the last several months. And we have to kick this up the chain to see what they can do to help us out here. I can't see how this is gonna hurt. One of the other questions I have is, where are we sending this? I mean, are we sending it to our congressional delegation or to the postmaster or whoever? But I mean, it should go to everybody we can, because it's just gonna die in a slow, painful death if it just drops in the mail to somebody. I mean, we need to follow up and see what we can do to make things better. I mean, I'm surprised people haven't gotten together and started picking up each other's package slips for their family members. I mean, I'm picking up for my kids and trying to do what I can, not going every day, but it is a nightmare up there. And in all honesty, just in full disclosure, we have had one or two mails from folks who think it's a great thing because they want to go up to the post office and interact with their neighbors. But that's only been one or two letters. But for the most part, everybody you talk to, by the time they get in line, and the only thing I can compare it to over the last couple of weeks is that TSA line down at SeaTac Airport. They've got me daisy chained through the post office, and I've passed the same person 4 or 5 times, and I'm looking at seeing if I'm still the same day. And I get to the front, and I'm just relieved to get there. And so, yeah, I'm going to support this. Anything I think we can do to wake somebody up the chain, whether it'll do any good, but yeah, we have to say something as a group. So thank you for bringing this forward. I appreciate it.
Member Mutchie, Member Lynn, I saw your hand.
Everything that Member Gensinger says is right. I agree, so I won't repeat any of that. But I have problems with supporting this. So I'll probably be voting no on it. And the couple reasons for that. First of all, when you talk about home delivery here, what do you really mean? What does it entail? And we've had a couple of letters to us saying, well, if that requires changing the addresses, do you mean I have to then change my address on my passport and my driver's license and everything else? And does every other resident in Petersburg, I don't know enough to be able to say home delivery is the right way to go. If we were to rewrite this in such a way that we were talking about the need and what could be done better, I would certainly support it. I can't support it because I don't have I can't say this is the right way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Lynn. Anyone else want to chime in? Member Kensinger, go right ahead, sir.
The way it works everywhere else is if you don't want to have home delivery, you just leave your PO box. If you don't want to change your address, you just leave your current PO box. If you want home delivery, yeah, you would have to change your address because they got to know where they want to take it to. It's pretty, what we're talking about here is something that occurs everywhere else in the United States. And I agree with your frustration. My goal in this is to kick this up the chain, and we have to start a formalized process if we want to see any improvements in the post office. And this has been going on for a lot longer than a year. And I don't know, I'm welcome to any ideas that anybody has on anybody we can call, anybody we can contact. But boy, we've been down that rabbit hole and we've come up with zip. When we talk to people in Anchorage, they tell us, oh, you're going to have regular postal hours. We have all these new people that are coming down there. They're going to work down here. So there's something going on up in Anchorage. Now, if we start a process like this, yes, it is a negotiating tactic, but it kicks it out of Anchorage, it kicks it onto the national level, and they're going to have to respond to us. And that's my purpose in this. So when they come to us, then we're going to have plenty of time to decide what the particulars are, whether you're going to have to buy a new post office box, whether you're going to have to change your address. Because for this to happen, they'd have to spend a lot of infrastructure money up at the post office to make it so that they could pick up mail. I mean, this is about the only place in the United States I know where there's not a post office box that you can take your mail and drop it off in. The only place you can do that is at the post office. And the way it works, like in Sitka, and I assume also in Anchorage, or in Juneau and Ketchikan, instead of having a PO box on your house, there's a bank of boxes on each block, and the mail carrier goes there and puts the mail in there, and they provide delivery to the businesses. So there's a whole bunch of different ways they could do it. I don't know how they're going to do it. I don't even know if they would do it. All I'm trying to do is trying to get a process going where we can bypass Anchorage because they're not listening to us. They're not being truthful with us, and get somebody's attention up the chain. That's the main impact of this. If we can figure out a better way to do it, I'm all for it.
Remember, you want the floor again?
Yeah, if I would be totally in favor of sending a group, like yourself, the mayor, so forth, to Anchorage and or Washington DC to discuss the problem, one-on-one, rather than to keep sending letters back and forth. I don't think this gets us where we want to go. I think there needs to be more discussion. And I would certainly be willing to support something like that, because I think that face-to-face might work better. As I said today, we cannot get those folks, post office at the higher levels to even acknowledge the fact there's a problem. And when I was in the interiors, I said, I've found the same problem. What is it? We don't even know. So I would totally support, yourself, the mayor, what have you, the manager, of doing something like that.
Go for it, Member Kinzer.
Yes, just a quick response.
You bet.
We've had a hard time even finding anybody to call. We've had a hard time even getting anybody to answer a phone. So yeah, I'd be happy to go on a trip, but I don't know where we'd go. I mean, that's the problem with this process. And if you talk to our congressional delegation, the staff members, they have the same issue, and this was kind of a suggestion that they had. Says, well, if you start this starts a formalized process, this will get their attention. So that's kind of where I'm at. I understand the pros and cons of this. I understand it is a negotiating tactic, and that was my original intent with it. But I got to thinking about it, and I actually kind of thought it'd be kind of nice to have my mail delivered and not have to spend an hour and a half, 2 hours at the post office to get stuff. But that said, it would be expensive for them to pull off. But guess what? It's costing us a lot of time and money as a community right now, the way the situation is. The difference between us and other places in the lower 48 is we can't hop in our car and drive 15 miles to the next community or the next post office to go buy stamps or go receive other services. We don't have that option here. Pretty expensive to hop on the jet and head to Juneau to access your postal services up there. So we're in a unique situation here, and I don't know. I don't think it's going to get any better. I mean, they have people that are ready, that they have vetted and they're ready to be hired, but for whatever reason, the Anchorage people aren't wanting to hire them. So I don't know.
Thanks, Member Kinzinger. I suppose I'll chime in before we get down to it. Yeah, I've been wrestling with this one for a bit. Here's where I think I've settled out. We have a couple different issues in play. One of them being a request for home delivery. That solves a problem, or at least a potential problem of having to go to a post office and go get your mail, deal with the line, etc. But there's a separate issue that I think underlies all this, and that's what I want to speak to. The underlying issue is staffing. And that's a rural post office nationwide issue right now. It's an anecdotal example. We've got a friend in Montana who floats around doing this fill-in work at the different post offices, similar to those of you at the post office seeing faces you don't recognize because they've come down from Anchorage or other places. He has a friend who only works part-time, but he's been working full-time for about 2 years now. There's not enough. And again, that's not unique to Petersburg, but we definitely feel it here. And so I think of an underlying for me writing a resolution requesting help. I haven't, like Member Tremblay said, I think a lot of the verbiage in there is great, but it's still two separate issues. Home delivery doesn't solve the staffing issue. We order a lot of stuff, so I'm up there a lot. I see Postmaster Albach, running to and fro, her staff running to and fro. Fill-ins come, fill-ins go, and we've had a staffing shortage for a long time now. We have a resolution before us at another meeting. Like, I'll be all about more or less a lot of the language in there and request for more staffing, because they're only open at the window from 1 to 5 because there's not enough people to do it. If they had enough people to be open from 9 to 5:30, many of us have spent holidays around the post office. It's a bit of a madhouse anyway, but as Member Mucci said earlier, I left today. I admitted I pulled the plug. I'm like, nah, I've been here 35 minutes. I'm pulling the plug. I'm gonna get outside in the daylight. And again, that's a staffing issue. That's not a reflection of the quality of staff there. It's a reflection of the number of staff. They're all working very hard and they're all doing very well, trying to be polite with all of us bristling in line for so long. In short, I'll be voting no on this, even as amended. But in the future, if we have an ordinance, resolution before us focusing on staffing, we could address that as is. Home delivery seems like it's secondary to the underlying issue of staffing. And I agree with what Member Kensinger says wholeheartedly. I've made some similar attempts. It's really hard to get a hold of anybody. It's almost eerie. You just can't get people. It's worse than a phone bank for some large corporation. It's odd. Anyway, that's my 2 cents of why I'll be voting no, but it's not out of any other place except for that I think I'd like us to focus on staffing. Any further discussion from the assembly before we call a vote on this? The clerk, please call the roll.
Chelsea,
No.
David,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
Jay,
No,
Bob.
No.
that resolution fails on a 2-3 margin with members Kensinger and Mucci voting yes. That brings us to resolution 2021-18, a resolution adopting an alternative allocation method for the FY22 Shared Fisheries Business Tax Program and certifying that this allocation method fairly represents the distribution of significant effects of fisheries, businesses, activities in FMA 18 Central Southeast Alaska. Just for those listening at home, each year the borough approves a version of this resolution adopting the alternative allocation method for the current fiscal year Shared Fisheries Business Tax Program. Finance Director Tao is requesting approval of resolution 2021-18 for FY22. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So move.
Second.
Motion has been made by member Mucci and seconded by member Tremblay. Any discussion on this yearly resolution we have brought forward? Okay, seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
David,
Yes.
Bob.
Yes.
Jeff.
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Chelsea.
Yes.
Right on. Resolution 2021-18 passes unanimously. Bring us to item D in new business. Resolution 2021-19, a resolution of the Petersburg Borough confirming application for the ARPA Local Government Lost Revenue Relief Program from the Alaska Department of Commerce, Community and Economic Development to offset significant revenue loss due to the COVID-19 public health emergency. Would entertain a motion to approve.
So move.
Second.
Motion has been made by member Mucci and seconded by member Tremblay. And for those listening at home, if we approve this resolution, it will allow the borough to apply to the state of Alaska for ARPA grant funds related to our government's loss of revenue due to COVID-19. Discussion. Member Mucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is this just the last piece of the application process? The application process is kind of in. We're just looking for a resolution to kind of say that the borough is all on board. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, give the floor to Director Tao if we could.
The resolution needs to be into the state by the end of this month. They extended the deadline for that. So this is just another ARPA funding opportunity from the Alaska Department of Commerce. It's only open to Alaska cities and boroughs. The applicants must show at least a 10% revenue loss, and they give you the calculation and how you're supposed to, calculate the revenue loss. And it's not quite as simple as you would think. And we also got to include the hospital in that number, which is why we probably are eligible for this. We showed a 16% revenue loss. Eligibility does not guarantee funding. The Alaska legislature appropriated about $50 million for this program. And, we're turning an application of $5 million. I mean, we're not the only ones. I would be shocked if we even got close to that amount. Yeah, it can be used for government services, including maintenance of infrastructure, new infrastructure, cybersecurity, health services, educational services, and public safety. And does anyone have any questions?
Thank you.
Oh, that sounds good. Other members of the assembly? Thank you, Director Tao. The clerk, please call the roll.
Jeff,
Yes.
Bob.
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Chelsea,
Yes.
Jay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And that resolution 2021-19 passes unanimously. Bring us to item E, the Pierce pumper truck, fire truck purchase. The Fire Department and Public Works Director Cotta recommend purchase of the Pierce pumper truck from Hughes Fire Equipment for an amount not to exceed $596,776 to replace fire engine number 5. $650,000 was approved in F 2022 motor pool budget for purchase. I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So move.
Second.
Motion been made by member Mucci and seconded by member Lynn. Do we still have Weldy on the phone, Mr. Weldy?
Yes, we do.
Since I feel bad in having him, he's sat for a long time, like, I'd rather just give the floor right to him and have him just kind of walk us through the fire truck, if that's all right.
I have him allowed to speak. He just needs to unmute himself.
Whenever you're set, Ryan.
Ryan, you're up if you can unmute your phone.
As we're trying to get him in case he has logged off, and I wouldn't blame him, he has a lot of patience. Director Cotta, could you speak to this briefly, please?
Sure. This purchase was, discussed during the budget process. It's the department's oldest engine and being retired chiefly because of its age. The existing engine doesn't have a lot of issues other than it's old, and things are probably past their peak, in some cases of some systems. So yeah, it was approved at a $650,000 budget. The fire department formed a committee to talk about all the various specifications, and there's a lot of information there. I went through it all. The committee spent a lot of time coming up with all those details. I think Assemblymember Mucci attended one of the meetings and got to see all the nuts and bolts they were discussing. But yeah, this truck is pretty much designed to meet the same mission as the old engine. The only really significant difference other than updated technology is, a larger cab. The old engine only seats a couple of folks, this is a crew cab engine, but other than that, it's pretty much, same configuration as the old engine that it's replacing.
Thank you, Director Cotta, and
Just wanted to add.
Please do.
Chris, is the timeframe still like 15 to 18 months once?
Yeah, the latest information I got says 14 and a half to 18 and a half months from order to delivery.
so long lead time as it is.
Yes.
Member Lynn, you look like you had some to say.
Yeah, and did I read in there also that if you sign a contract, I believe by the end of the year or something like that, that there was approximately $50,000 savings if we did that? Is that the way I read it? I don't remember the exact amount.
Yeah, there are definitely some incentives to purchase now. They're having a price increase sometime in January. So they kind of gave us a deadline of January the 14th. If we order by that date, we'll lock in the pricing that we have. If we miss that window, then the price of the vehicle will go up approximately 7%, which is about $42,000, I think I figured.
Question, Member Lynn?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Member Mucci, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like Director Cotta said, yeah, I sat in for a couple hours on a Saturday and went through. I know there was 200 pages, but you can see there's 13 pages of all the nuts and bolts that goes with this fire truck. One of the safety features that I was pretty impressed they were talking about is that when the firefighters are in the truck with their SCBAs on traveling to wherever they're going, it has an automatic locking system where they can't get thrown out of their seat with their SCBA on. And, I think it's well worth this new fire truck. Granted, the old one doesn't have a lot of miles on it, but technology's changed so much. And I think it's important that when the fire department and EMS rolls into a fire or an emergency situation, they have the best they can have to make sure everybody's safe and they can do their mission. So yeah, I'm voting for this. And like Director Carter says the price goes up on January 14th. So I think this is a great time to get it out the door. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Member Mucci. Yeah, for those listening at home, we approved this as part of this year's budget and or during the last budget cycle. Now that we've kind of got our final cost, that's why before us again. It's not something we've been talking about for a while. So I'm glad it's before us today. Any further discussion from the assembly? The clerk, please call the roll.
Chelsea,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Bob, Jay,
Yes.
Jeff.
Yes.
Thank you.
That purchase approval passes unanimously. Bring us down to item F, our last action item. Assembly Member Mucci requests a work session to discuss how to use ARPA, coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds, and suggests Monday, January 24th or Monday, January 31st as dates for the work session. I suppose since it's an action item, and entertain a motion to approve that with one of those dates.
So move.
Second.
Do you assign one of the dates to it? Doesn't work, we can always amend it. Does that seem cleaner that way, Clerk Thompson, if we pick a date? Or does it
That's
matter to you?
fine.
January 24th would be my preferred date.
Do you maintain your second, Member Kensinger?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we got it on the floor. Member Mucci, since it was your action item, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've been talking about this over the last couple of weeks, and I'm hoping that we could have a work session to discuss this ARPA funding and what some of our options are of what we can do with it. We've seen that I think it's 600 and some odd $1,000 that we have in this grant that we have, and we have 3 years to spend it. And I'm trying to at least lay some groundwork out that gives community organizations, community members an idea of what we can do with this money. Now one of the big things I'm pounding on is the childcare assistance, and trying to figure out how we can be more substantial in keeping those childcare funds coming into the nonprofit as well as profit. If it goes to the agencies or the parents, we're seeing cost of electricity going up. We're seeing the cost of sanitation going up. These are funds that need to go to the community and the community members. I'm hoping that we could sit down and chat about maybe a 3-year program where we had $200,000 available for over a 3-year period, and not necessarily spend that $200,000 every year, maybe put part of it aside for unforeseen expenses that might pop up, but at least give the community members and nonprofits as well as profits an opportunity to kind of apply for funding that the federal government gave to this community to help recover some of the costs that folks are struggling to make ends meet here. I think both of the nonprofit childcare facilities in town just received word about getting grants that they've applied for, and that's helpful. But I think we need to lay out a groundwork for the rest of the community so they can see what's going on here. I suggested these dates, and we're talking about January 24th, because I know we're going to be getting into the budget sessions here starting in February and March. And I wanted to get this behind us so that we didn't get clogged up in the budget stuff, because the budget process it's very lengthy. City staff has a lot to do. And I was just hoping that we could get in and maybe see what the assembly wanted to do with this money and just entertain some ideas. So that's where I'm going with it. If we just want to let it die, then that's fine. But I think we need to talk about it and let the community know that there's an opportunity for them to recover some of the costs that they've been spending. So that's why I put it on here, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Mucci. Member Lynn.
Thank you. I think from my perspective, we're way too premature for quite a number of reasons. I agree with everything that somewhat with what Jeff says, or Member Mucci says, but my butt is that we have 3 or 4 years to spend that money. We have, the state has approximately $500 million to give out. We don't even know what the criteria is yet. I was looking at one of the child care even the childcare has a significant amount of money. I don't remember what that is statewide. Number one is so that there is a lot of the ARPA money yet to come down, one, in all forms. I even looked at one today that had for fuel, that could be applied for under ARPA. All kinds of things still yet to come down. Second, we don't know what is going to happen in our own community, either with the hospital or where the virus is going to go or anything else. And these funds could definitely be used to help backstop anything that might come in the future. They don't have to be spent right today. The third thing is that the governor has set his budget with the legislature with some increase in school fund or some changes in school funding, particularly the bond debt, which really helps us. And there's other things in there, possibly, you know, our schools may need some other different kind of a funding related to the virus and so forth. For us to sit here and by the 24th of January to decide all these things, I think is way premature. I think we need to wait. And the other thing is that the federal agencies, from the federal agency standpoint, there's also, I was looking the other day, there's significant ARPA funds yet to come down even to the state. And I won't use the right words, but essentially competitive grants and different kind of grants to come out yet for both childcare and for other things that we don't even begin to know yet. So I think it's premature. I agree with the idea of doing it, but I think it's premature. I think we ought to wait till May, June, somewhere around there to look at this till some of these things come out. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Lynn. Member Tremblay.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments, Member Lynn, about all of the stuff we're waiting to hear it shake out. But from my perspective, this is an ongoing public health emergency. I know we're not in an official state of it, and some people hate the use of that word entirely, but for some people, this is a real moment of crisis and caution for them. And so I think this would not be the end of the work sessions in my mind. This is just a start to them. And I would like to have a work session so that we could possibly identify any immediate needs we might be seeing in the community. For example, health recommendations are now to upgrade the quality of your masks, especially if you are immunocompromised. And so I would like to see, for example, community purchasing of KN95s to be able to hand out instead of the cloth ones, because those are fine, but they're not actually what they're recommending now to help keep people safe. And so I would like to see, that's just an example of something that we don't have currently on hand that we're handing out for free that I think would make a difference for some community members. And so I see a January meeting as an opportunity to get stuff started on in terms of what kind of immediate costs there could be or what immediate things we could be seeing. And yes, there are going to be many, many things coming down the pike. And so I don't see it as the end of the conversation, but that's just something off the top of my head. I'm sure if other people knew that this meeting was happening, we would hear more about immediate needs that could be starting to get met. And it's also a chance for us to start to get at some of the systemic issues that led to some costs we made in the beginning of this that maybe we could avoid down the line again. And so to my mind, more conversation is better. As with all things COVID, the second we start, it gets messy and people have a lot of input. So I don't see it being an easy conversation, but I would like to have it soon. So that's why when Member Mucci was deciding which date, I kind of just whispered the sooner one on an off chance, because to me, sooner is better. So yeah, I guess to me, it can't hurt to just start it. And so that's why I'm going to be voting yes.
Thank you, Member Tremblay. Member Kensinger, floor is yours.
I don't see the point in delaying. As far as waiting on the state, we could be waiting a long time. There's, the situation might not be any clearer in March than it is in January. And I'm kind of confused about it, what we can do with it, what we can't do with it, what ideas people have. So that's why I like the idea of a work session where we can put some ideas on the table. I've heard about 4 or 5 of them here tonight, and I'm sure there's a lot more out there. My only concern is it's a pretty finite amount of money. It's not a whole lot of money. And I'm afraid, we might want to, I think it's time to start a community discussion on the best way to use it. And I think the work session accomplishes that. I think if we wait until later on in the spring or even early summer, we're going to be bogged down in the budget process. And that's going to suck a lot of the energy out of the air. So I'm going to support having a work session on the 24th.
Thanks, Member Kensinger. Yeah, I've been on the fence about this a little bit. I take heed in what Member Lynn said about maybe a little bit early in the process because we are waiting on so many moving parts. And also to your point, Member Kensinger, you raise a very good point for waiting on the state forever. We could be waiting on the state forever. So your point's well taken. Another thought I had, I'm not saying this is where I'm going with it, was actually making it, that ARPA funds are part of the budget process. We could flesh out specific things during that time and making, it's just, I'll take a motion from one of the members of the assembly to say we want to allocate this. But if we do a work session here, and I feel free to give any feedback here, other members of the assembly, is one of the primary things that jump out at me is criteria. It is a finite pot of money. And I'm willing to bet if we had a room full of people tonight, besides Brian out there, advocating for why they had, for ARPA funds would help, I would be like, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, good call. It's, everyone has, not everyone, but most of us have endured in some way, shape, or form, whether it be loss of revenue, PPE, you name it, those can go on and on, things we're quite familiar with. And without a discernible process as how to allocate some of that, it would, if you would turn into a race to who can ask first. Again, I think many people would have a compelling argument as to why. So, so in that regard, I'm hesitant to do a work session, but let me, Jody, I'm gonna put you on the spot and I apologize in advance. Like, do we know what do we know, like, just from like, how strict is the criteria we've got from the state and federal government right now on the use of those funds, first of all?
Well, it's pretty strict unless you can show that you've had lost revenue, which we can. So then that opens it up to other possibilities as well. Alaska Municipal League is a great resource to look into that some more.
Yeah.
Perhaps if you had a work session, someone from there could be there, or call in and help discuss.
Oh, totally. And I've read the same stuff on that. That's actually a great idea, having an AML person.
Probably have, could give you some examples of what other communities have been using it on.
Absolutely. I would take it a step further with some of my problem wrapping my brain around this is even fitting state and federal requirements, or in terms of like state requirements, like we have to refine that even further, to having our own criteria based on that. Because again, I think we could probably find many businesses or individuals who would fit that criteria, but then our money's gone in 6 months. That's just an objective reality. Like, it isn't that, like, it is a pretty finite amount of money. It isn't a discussion item right now, it's an action item, so I don't need a response from other assembly members, but any of you feel free to chime in terms of you've considered that factor, the idea of the criteria-based thing. Because to me, it seems like a really painful rabbit hole where we're accidentally slighting someone inadvertently or favoring someone inadvertently. Member Mucci, I saw your finger. I'll cede the floor.
It was this one.
Okay, I saw one thing. My bad.
Just wanted to be clear. Folks at home.
For the record.
Yeah, I'm not advocating spending all this money in the next 6 months. I'm advocating trying to come up with a plan for the next 3 years to come up with some type of thought process about what we're going to do with this money. If we were going to use part of it for childcare, or we're going to use part of it for home heating or other issues. I'd like to have the conversation about what this assembly wants to do with this money. Yes, there's more money we hope coming down the pipeline, but right now we have X amount of dollars, ARPA funds, that have been given to us. And we should start discussing what we want to do with that money. I go back to the CARES Act money that we got a while back ago, and we ran out of time. And we took $600,000, or I can't even remember the amount of money, and we rolled it into the general fund because we didn't have anything to do with the money. We've ended up spending it on other stuff, but I don't want that to happen. We have this fund of money that I think could go a long way in helping some community members and organizations within the community to make ends meet in a real tough time in the community. And I keep going back to childcare, and I spent an hour at Petersburg Children's Center last week. And the hour in there just made me understand how less I understand about the childcare facilities and the workings in this town. And without dependable childcare in this community, this economy in this town will never get off the ground. We will flounder, and I'd like to see us have at least a 3-year plan to figure out how we can help out the childcare facilities in Petersburg. So yeah, it's just a work session to discuss some ideas and hear from Jody and maybe the Alaska Municipal League and just a couple other folks who could help us kind of put a thought process together so that we can come up with an organized thought process on spending some of this money that we have currently now. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Quick point of clarification. Member or Director Tao, it strikes me as inaccurate. Did we take $600,000 in CARES Act money and just dump it in the general fund? We didn't have a spot for it? I might be wrong, but I haven't
allocated
seen
it
it.
towards public safety, and therefore it did go into the general fund. And we haven't really spent it on anything else. It's
Right on, but an allocation towards public
reserves.
safety. That is on an open pot. Thank you for that clarification, Director Tao. I mean, my own process again, bear with me. I'm not averse to a work session. I think it'd be highly productive. I mean, I don't necessarily see how having a work session gets us in the place of helping further childcare at this point. But my concern is it'll be, Clerk Thompson, how would we get together an agenda for a set work session? Because I could see this, I see no use in a 4-hour corn maze of a meeting talking about ideas that may or may not be useful. What would be an appropriate way to get an agenda in place for a work session? I'm trying to wrestle if I can vote for this or not. So if you wouldn't mind helping me out.
Well, I suppose that maybe Member Mucci would want to come up with an agenda of bullet points to speak about. I personally do think if you just say, we're gonna have a work session, we're gonna talk about ARPA funds, that's too huge. And I do want to make sure that you understand as well that a work session really isn't for the public to come in and give their input. They can listen, but it's for you guys.
And send us letters beforehand, et cetera.
To
But no, the
work,
work session
yes.
is solely the assembly. It's not a town hall.
So it's almost, I mean, I don't know. I guess there's a little time and maybe you would like to put out a call to the community to let you guys know what it is that they are in need of.
Yep.
And then from correspondence that you get, maybe you would want to draft up an agenda. There doesn't necessarily have to be an agenda, but for something like this, it makes sense. You want to stay on
We need
task,
an
right?
agenda for that.
And not waste money. I mean, time. I don't know.
No, I appreciate your feedback, Clerk Thompson. I'll cede the floor. Everyone's pointing.
Go ahead,
Oh.
Dave, Member Kunzinger.
The main thing that I'd like to see is criteria. I mean, like establish, okay, we have this pot of money. What sort of sideboards are we going to put on to spend it? Are we going to try and, do we want to concentrate it on one specific area, whether it's like childcare? Do we want to spend it all in 1 year? Do we want to try and spend it in 3 years? Those are, I think, the starting points. And then I think if we figure out a program, then let's say we decide to give it to childcare, and then the state all of a sudden, after 6 or 8 months, when they're done with their process, they dump a lot of money into it. Then we still have money that we haven't spent for unforeseen things. And, or maybe it's the will of the assembly to spend it all in one go on one thing. I don't know. But that's the value of a work session. We can kind of hash out where everybody's at. I mean, I've heard enough from our discussion here tonight to kind of understand that there's a lot of different things we can do with this money, but I'd like to have some feedback from the community and my other assembly members. And so I don't see the harm in having a work session. It doesn't commit us to anything really.
Not at all, in fact. Member Lynn.
I'm the same place as our acting mayor is that I think there needs to be a set of criteria and there needs to be a process, and I don't see either right now. And by the 24th, I'm not sure you can get there, but I'll leave that open.
Thank you, Member Lynn. Further discussion? All right, bear with me while I pull this back up. Or the clerk, please call the roll on the ARPA funding work session scheduled for January 24th, 2022.
Chelsea,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Jay,
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Bob?
No.
That motion passes 4-1 with member Lynn voting no. Bringing us on to communications. Communications received since December 2nd, 2021 can be viewed on the Borough website. Happy reading. Assembly discussion items. Item 8, Assembly member comments. Floor is open. Member Tremblay.
Thank you. In a previous moment, I mentioned that it's recommended people update their masks to N95s. And I wanted to highlight a website because there are a lot of counterfeit masks being sold on Amazon. And so there's a website called projectn95.org, projectn95.org. And that's where you can buy, that's a vetted website that hosts where people can find their masks, including ears or across the head. And like I said, unfortunately, they are not cheap. They are nicer masks than are being currently handed out for free, but that is an important resource I wanted to let people know about. So, yeah.
Thank you again, Member Tremblay, for that valuable safety information. Other Assembly member comments. Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And I was talking to Steve earlier, I can't even remember when, but it was just amazing how everybody in this community kind of came together and took care of the snow issue that we had. It was the whole town working together to kind of get that snow kind of being able to be dealt with. And it was really impressive. There was a lot of snow moved. There were individuals, there were businesses, there was the state, there were our guys at Public Works who were working long and crummy hours. And yeah, I just wanted to say thanks to Public Works and everybody else who did extra to kind of make it manageable downtown, because it was kind of a nightmare for a day or two. So thank you.
Any other Assembly member comments before we move on to recognitions? I'll open with recognition. I've got 2 of them. One is I'd like to thank our postmaster at the post office for her continued service to our community. It's been inhospitable conditions for as members of the Assembly said, for a long time now. Lots of staff turnover. We see new faces phone in from Anchorage and all other places. It's not an easy job, and know that I appreciate the smiling face of her and her staff whenever we get up there. Second recognition is thank you to all borough staff. You're always very polite and patient with me when you see me around trying to ask questions, coming in, talking to different department heads. So, and thank you just for all of your service over the course of the year. Just know that I value all of your efforts. No one's job is easy. All jobs have their challenges. So please know that I appreciate it. And yeah, I hope everyone can have a holiday season where they can find gratitude and peace, however that means for them. And I will cede the floor. Any other recognitions this evening? Member Kensinger.
Yes, I'd just like to piggyback on Jeff's comments. Thanks to everybody in Public Works for the many hours of snow plowing, the state, everybody else that's been behind a snowblower or shovel the last week. Thank you. And I just want to wish everybody in the community a Merry Christmas.
Anything else? Clerk Thompson. Yes.
Thank you, Vice Mayor
course.
Stanton Greger. I would like to recognize Karen Malcolm. I'm sure everyone noticed that in this packet, there are many, many sets of Assembly meeting minutes that were back in 2020. During the height of COVID stuff, I got extremely behind. And during all of that, you know, we went through where we didn't have good equipment for our audio and blah, 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 and we made changes. And the program that we used back then, we no longer use. So really it was Karen and I, the 2 people that knew how to still use that old program. And I still, needed help. I was short on time, and Karen did the heavy lifting and did most of those minutes. All I did was come in at the end and do a little cleanup and be able to put them before you. So I just wanted to say thank you so much to Karen for her help. I really appreciate it. We are now caught up.
Very good. Thank you so much, Karen Malcolm. I'm glad you brought that up, Debbie. That's awesome. In that case, Wish you all a Merry Christmas, and I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, adjourned.